The semester has started, and that means if you're not swamped by grading yet, you will be soon enough. In today's video, I'm talking about strategies to make grading faster and easier. Let's get started. Today's video doesn't go live on the same day a new blog post does, so I thought I'd look for a past blog post that can be made into a great video. And I decided to do my post about 5 strategies to make grading faster and easier. So first I'll cover those 5, and then I'll add a couple more for this video as well to give you some new material too. And so of the 5 tips that I have in this blog post, which I have linked below, the first 2 are more for, prior to the semester when you're still planning how schedule goes. But hopefully the second one you can still manage if you haven't told your students what the end of your semester will look like, or trimester. And so the first strategy is to design your assignments so that the deadlines are scaffolded, right? Or they don't come all at the same time. So rather than having, hey, turn this one thing, all of you, on this day, you can have, for example, a group project where every week for 10 weeks, 3 students present some type of project. In that case, you can just grade each group each week, rather than having to wait to the end to get all 10 at once, right? So this could obviously work well with group projects, but it could also work well with individual ones, such as turning in like mini literary analysis posts. I have this option as well, and they have 6 or 7 weeks to fill them out because we read so many novels, but they only have to do a certain number. So again, I can start grading maybe 4, 8, 12 at a time, and then at the end only have a couple weeks where I usually get close to the full class because of those who wait until the end to fill them out. So that's staggering your grading can help make it much faster a process. The second tip that it's easier to implement prior to the semester, but maybe you can still manage it, is to have your last assignment be a summative one. So rather than having, for example, your final paper or project due the last week, or even during finals week, have it be due maybe 2 to 3 weeks before the semester ends, and at the end of the semester assign some type of reflective piece. So maybe, give them some guidance of, I want you to talk about how 5 terms or 5 concepts or 2 novels, whatever the case may be, we've talked about in class. Like, what do you think they're important? How they influence you? What did you learn from them, right? And so you can just ask them, look back at the semester at all you've accomplished, pick out what you think are your strongest pieces, and tell me why you think that, right? So it's summative of the semester, it's using things they've already done, or just it's kind of short paragraphs or bullet point lists of what they learned, so it makes it a much shorter assignment to grade. So you had a big one, and you have 2 or 3 weeks now to grade it, that final paper or project, and then the small one you can do very quickly because they're much shorter projects. So that can really help you at the end of the semester to not be bombarded with so much long pieces to grade. So the third tip can happen at any point in the semester. You didn't have to prep for it beforehand. And that's to mainly use summative feedback with your projects. And so formative versus summative, just very quickly defining them. So formative is feedback you do throughout a project versus summative is at the very end. And so the way I mean this tip in particular is that rather than doing inline feedback throughout, let's say, a paper or a lab report or whatever the project is, you just, at the end of the paper or lab report, have a paragraph or 2 of summative feedback. I noticed these 2 things in this paper that could be improved upon. Here's some tips for how to do that. I noticed you did this great, good job, keep that up, etc. Right? Versus going sentence by sentence and being, okay, add a comma here, well, what's this thing here, etc., etc. That always takes a lot longer. So I tend to maybe do that in the beginning to give them like really detailed feedback of how to improve. But then halfway through the end of the semester, I just have, here's a paragraph or 2 at the end saying what went well or what went poorly, what can be improved upon. And so I really think focusing on summative feedback in this way can be helpful. On the flip side though, if you do prefer formative feedback, that can be helpful throughout our project because you might have, we'll turn in an outline first and you can give them feedback because that's a quick thing to look at and read, right? And that can make them improve the paper. So hopefully you'll have less errors to correct or at least point out in the paper because you've already seen their outline. So really each of them, formative and summative, could work really well. But in this tip, I'm focusing on, don't always do inline feedback because that will take you a lot of time. You'd rather have more summative, overall feedback to help them get through. And then you can say, come see me during my office hour if you want more in-depth feedback. So following up on that tip of formative versus summative, you also want to minimize how much feedback you give. Okay, so I'm someone who gives individual feedback on all major projects, right? So I'm not saying don't give individual feedback, but you want to kind of see, well, what kind of assignments can I give that don't require tons of individual feedback, right? So maybe you give reading quizzes, that's basically you mark it right or you mark it wrong, right? If you do, for example, exams that are not essay exams, then again, is the answer right or is the answer wrong? So that's quick and doesn't require feedback. Okay, so then you could have the longer projects, papers, and so to speak, that you can do the individual feedback, but you're kind of balancing it out with types of assignments that don't require huge amounts of individual feedback, right? So creative projects like doing outlines or concept maps, right? Or doing a bullet point list of things you've learned while reading this novel or doing this project can be quick and easy to give just a sentence or two of feedback versus the longer ones require much more. So see how you can balance the actual activity design to help minimize how much feedback you're giving for each assignment. And the final tip that's included in that blog post that I have linked below is to ask students how much feedback they want on their final project. Okay, because let's be honest, students, when it's finals week, right, or even post the semester, once they know their grade, might not even bother looking at the feedback you gave them for that final paper, lab report, whatever the case may be, right? And so sometimes I actually say, I pass out index cards and I say, how much feedback do you even want on your final paper, right? Do you want in-text detailed feedback? Do you want just a paragraph or two of summative like you've seen before with me? Or do you want no feedback because you're not going to look at it anyways, right? And so in that case, I'm like, be honest, I really do not care how much feedback you want me to give. I just want to make sure I'm using my time wisely because I too am very busy at this time of the semester. And so out of 30 students, I might have maybe only actually 2 or 3 who say, don't give me any because I'm not going to read it. I have other things to do, thanks, but no thanks. Then I might have closer to 20 to 22 who will say, just give me a quick summative feedback. I just want a general sense of what your thoughts were. And then I might have 5 or a few more who say, oh yeah, I would love to have detailed feedback. I'm really interested in seeing, how I can improve this paper. Right? And so I actually let them tell me how much feedback they want at the very end, right? So I wouldn't do this so much in the beginning because you might have one say, oh, I don't want any feedback. Well, then how can they improve if they don't know what you think went wrong or what could be improved? But for the very last project, why not? Because it can help you. And again, you can still give them feedback if they want it, but you're not wasting that time for those who are not even going to bother looking at what you have to say about their final project. So those first 5 tips were all included in my old blog post, but I have a couple more to give you as well in this video. And so the first is you can try doing peer assessment or even peer grading in your classes, right? So peer grading can be harder because you're actually giving your students the power to grade each other's work, and so you have to go through and with the class and decide, okay, well, how do we decide what's an A paper or a B paper, right? What elements we're all looking for? How important are those elements, do you think? And coming up with basically a class rubric, that can take a lot of time, right? So I think peer assessment is a good alternative, unless you really like the thought of doing peer grading. And so for peer assessment, what I have my students do is, the class period before an assignment is due, I had them exchange their projects with one of their classmates, and I had this guide of look for A, B, C, D, E, or F in this particular project, make sure you point out what's missing, what can be improved, etc., and have them do like really close inline, feedback for their classmate. And that way they have 2 or 3 days before the project is due where they can revise before submitting it. In that case, then usually the final product has fewer problems, right? So it makes grading for me easier and faster because their classmate has helped them find already errors in or issues with their paper, right? Because I've told them, I'll be looking for these 10 things, go look for those 10 things in their paper. What's missing, what can be improved on, right? And so that takes up class time, yes, but it does make grading faster in a lot of ways. So something you might consider doing in your class. And then my final tip is to do your grading in chunks, right? And so what I mean by that is, let's say they turn something in on Wednesday, then on Thursday and Friday, try to get all of it done, unless it's obviously a super huge assignment, Okay, so I might do, let's do 15 on Thursday and 15 on Friday so that they're all done. And when you do that, I grade holistically, and I'll have a whole post about what I mean by that, and I'll link below. So what I do is, I make sure that when I grade the 15 on Thursday, after I do that, I go back and I make sure, all right, when I said this about this paper and I gave it, a 93, and then later on I say the same thing and I gave that one a 91, okay, which one do I actually think is correct here? And so I changed one of them into the same grade as the other. So you want to make sure that when you first start, maybe you're just like, all right, that's not too bad, 95, right? But then at the end, like, okay, I've seen this same issue 15 times, it's bothering me. So now it's an 88. You want to make sure you're being fair to all of your students. So I do suggest do it in chunks, because if you're doing 3 a day over 2 weeks, it's going to be very hard to remember why you gave something in 93 on the day 1, but then you gave the same thing in 88, on day 7, because you're not keeping in mind that, I said this about this error early on, and now I've changed my mind because I'm frustrated, or I'm running out of time, or I'm busy, and so now I give it something else. So I'm not a fan of rubric grading, and again, I say why in my post. So I don't like having this idea of it's an A if X, and it's a B if Y, and it's a C if Z. I do think holistic grading is the way to go, but to make sure I counterbalance the slippery slope of subjectivity sometimes, I make sure that I grade it very close together in chunks, so I'm remembering I said this issue equated to this grade, make sure I keep that true as I go down the whole list. So once I finish all 30 on Friday in this example, again, I go through and read my feedback and I make sure, yes, I'm being consistent in my grading. So whenever you assign assignments that are turned in all at one go, make sure you don't wait too long to actually grade them, right? So that you can ensure that you're being fair to all of your students. Plus, get it over with so you can celebrate the rest of the semester and have some free time to rest. And so those are my 7 tips for this video. If you have any of your own tips about grading, making it faster and easier, please let me know in the comments below. And I'd appreciate if you click the like button if you found these tips helpful. If you haven't subscribed yet, I do offer teaching tips and resources for new college instructors, and then every once in a while as well, some grad school life advice too. So I'll see you next week.